if you wanted to do pack spawning, you would probably find yourself a spawn location and do something like a find nearest reachable point in navigatable radius. Thanks to the power of PCG, you could just have a mob spawner to just spawn everything you need. And then you could specify how many of what character you want. So I can have 4 of this character, or 6, or 3. This system allows you to just basically go in and specify what character you want to spawn and how many. And I say character, but there's absolutely nothing stopping you from using the system. And instead of using characters, spawn whatever you want. Specify how many you want, specify what it is that you want to spawn, and then spawn it. And as you can see, none of these characters ever overlap. There's always a gap between all of them. So effectively, you can go ahead and figure out where you have your navigatable area, place a spline exactly where it is, not need to worry about anything. Don't worry about the height changes or anything. Just make sure that you have your locations picked out, choose what to spawn, and go nuts. And again, because it's PCG, you can even assign different attributes or rather variables to it at the spawn. We're not going to get into that. We're just going to worry about the spawning this time, but you know, I can set in variables all the way through if I wanted to. So with all of that out of the way, let's get into it. Here I am in a new project. So we're going to get started by just right clicking and grabbing ourselves a blueprint class of a type actor to begin with. This is going to be our BP_character spawner. We're going to need this along with 2 PCG graphs. So I'll go ahead and make them now by just right clicking, go to procedural, PCG graph. We'll create an empty graph. The first one will be just PCG_character spawner. This is going to be our main graph. And the second one will be our PCG loop character spawner, because we're going to need one as a loop and one as regular. We're going to need to loop on it because for every single entry, we're going to need to have, of course, a different configuration. So we want to make sure that if you're sending variables through or how many you want to spawn, right, it's going to take all that into consideration. The last thing we actually need is the information that we're going to be sending through. I'm going to make it through a struct by just right clicking, going to blueprint, and then down here, there's a structure. So we'll grab ourselves a structure. I'll call it something like s_character spawn info. So those are the 4 files that we need to do this entire system. Let's go ahead and set up the structure first. Let's open it up. And here we can specify the actual variables that we need. Well, the first one is going to be the character. Again, I say character, but it could be anything. The main thing is it just needs to be of a type of actor. So this way, in theory, you could just spawn the characters and any blueprints at all with the system in one go. You don't even need to specify that it's going to be a character specifically. You get a character, make it a box with some treasure inside, make it whatever you want in a big area. It'll spawn it all and make sure nothing overlaps. The big difference here, though, is instead of an object reference, we actually want a class reference. The reason we want to do a class reference instead of an object reference here is because when you do an object reference, you can see here in the default values, I can't select anything. That's because it wants something in the world. But a class reference just takes the class, which means I have access to everything in the entire Unreal project because it is just going to grab the base class, the defaults of whatever that blueprint is basically. And that's all we need. We just need to know the base class of it. So that is our character of type actor. And then we need one more. And as you might imagine, we just need the count. This one's just going to be a simple integer. I'll just change the default count here to 1. So that way by default, if we added something, that means we're probably spawning it. So let's go ahead and have the default to 1. And that's all I need here. To make this work, this is all you need. Let's go ahead and save. And now let's go ahead and configure the actual blueprint. Let's open it up. We're going to need a few things. The first thing we're going to need is, well, the PCG graph. So let's add ourselves a PCG component. And in the detail panel, we'll go ahead and plug in the graph. We want to plug in the character spawner main graph in here. Aside from that, we're going to need a few more components. So let's go ahead and add ourselves a spline component. We want a regular spline. And this is where you can specify kind of the default size of it. You can hold the Alt button down and just change the shape here. So if I did something like this, there we go. That is the now default shape. The only thing is we wanted to make sure that it's on interior. So that way, when we go ahead and spawn things, it is a closed loop. So let's go in the detail panel and just search for close, and we will turn on closed loop. That's all we really need for it, because you can see now we now have a full closed loop, and that's perfect. The last thing I want to do is add ourselves a box collision. Now, this box collision just needs to kind of be the size roughly of this entire place. So again, in the detail panel, let's modify the box extents here. And I'll just go ahead and roughly give it the size that will fill in this entire spline. That way, we know that whatever we're doing will be inside of this bounds. Since the plan is to use this potentially at runtime, this really helps. And because I don't want it to actually have any collisions, I will search for collision and then change the collision presets to no collision. So that way it will not affect navigation or absolutely anything else. It is there just for the PCG graph to understand where it needs to spawn things, the kind of the bounds of it. So fantastic. That is really all we need here in terms of the components. Aside from the components, we need a few variables. Well, really only one. We need the spawner info variable of the struct that we made. So you want to grab the s_character spawn info variable, and we want to make sure that it is exposed. That way we can modify it. And I also want to give it an array. So I'll right click and convert to an array. I'll go ahead and compile it. And by default, it has nothing in it. I'm fine with leaving it like this. You can always add a default in here. So if you want to, go ahead and add a default. I'll go ahead and select one of the characters I have and maybe give it a spawn count of 10 just for the defaults here. Then we can go ahead and modify from there. So great, we have the components. We have the variable that we get to modify when we bring into the world. Let's also go ahead and randomize the actual seed whenever we tweak it. I'll just go into the construction script for this one, and I'll just grab the PCG component here, drag out, and search for set seed. And basically, I'm just going to set the seed whenever it is adjusted. This way, if you want to keep it in place but want to randomize the seed, this is a way of doing it. As you're tweaking the values, it'll continuously pick a different seed. If you want it to always be consistent, don't do this. So that way, if you're not changing the spline or the values, it's going to be consistent. It's entirely up to you of which one you would prefer. I want it to be a little random, so that's why we're doing this. I'll just do a random integer in range. And I'll just do like a minus a bunch of 9s and positive a bunch of 9s. Just like that. There you go. So pick a random seed and assign it whenever we make any changes in this blueprint. And that's it. That's all we need in this blueprint. So if you want to, we can just go ahead and just drag this out. So there's our graph here. And if we want to, we can go ahead and modify it by just holding Alt, right? Making a few more points. Tweak this to our heart's content in the whatever shape we want this to be. And one thing to note here is as I'm doing this, right, it is now outside of the volume. So we want to make sure that this always maintains inside the volume, no matter what kind of shape we end up using. So what we can do here is just go in the components and select box. And when we do that, we can just go ahead and move and adjust this box volume. And I'll just go ahead and scale it accordingly. In fact, I'll scale it a bit vertically because what we're going to do is we're going to actually move this up, as in the entire actor. So I'll go ahead and move the entire thing up, but I want to make sure that the box actually hits the ground because I want to also spawn things maybe a little bit on higher platforms. For that, I'll just go ahead and add a few regular cubes, and I'll just modify them to have a little bit of a kind of an area here, and we'll be able to test at different elevations how this is going to work. The main thing is, for whatever elevation you end up choosing, make sure that the bounding box is within all of this area and that the spline is on top of whatever the highest level is. So if I was to move this down, this top one would not get any spawns because it's gonna spawn downward. So we'll just move it higher and this should be fine. And while we're here, might as well modify the spawner information. I'll go ahead and add 3 more entries here because I have 3 more character types that I'm going to spawn. So I'll just go ahead and select them here. In my case, they're just 4 different actors entirely. They have no connection to each other. And I'll just specify how many of each I want. Maybe something like this as an example. If you're wondering what they are, this is it. This is the entire character. This is from Kenny. I've been using his assets a lot. And they're just regular characters here. Or rather, it's really the same character with just a different texture. So now we have just 4 characters that are basically just different actors that we're spawning around. So now let's go ahead and actually open up the main PCG graph and get started on that. Well, we're going to need a few things here, right? We're going to need to get the spline information because that's what we're using to actually spawn everything. So we're going to get the spline data. It is by default already on self, so that's all we need. We don't need to modify anything. We just need then a spline sampler. And on the spline sampler is where we can specify how we want it to sample. So in my case, instead of on spline, I want to do on interior. immediately you will get a warning. One or more rows of the spline interior failed to sample. Interior test failed. Ensure the spline points are not overlapping. Yada, yada, yada. This has been a warning since almost the beginning, if not the very beginning. To this day, I don't know what the problem is. No points are overlapping. Everything is fine. I do not know why it's complaining. It's a warning. Everything will work fine. You don't need to worry about it. I've just learned to ignore it because typically if you were to save and restart Unreal, it's just not even there. I don't know. Genuinely to this day, I have no idea what's up with this warning. It just seems inaccurate to me. Warning aside though, we do want to tweak a few more things. I want to change the interior sample spacing to something like 200. If I was to press D on the spline sampler, we could see that this basically makes it so we have 100 by 100 cubes, and they're spaced with effectively a 100 distance in between them. The reason I want to do this is so that way I can slightly offset all of these points, so that way when the characters actually spawn, they don't feel like they're going to be in perfect grids. So with that, we can just use a simple transform points node and then just offset it by -50 in X and Y to +50 in X and Y. We don't want to move it up and down. We just want to move it forward, back, and left and right. So effectively we get this. And again, because we're only moving them 50 in either direction, and the spacing was originally 200, right? 50 times 2 is 100. 100 plus the block size of 100 means they will never actually overlap. They might get close, but they'll never touch each other. Now, if your characters are bigger, like they're more wide, adjust your spacing accordingly. For the default character, this is plenty. So awesome, we now have the points where we're going to be using to spawn from. So now we're going to need to actually spawn the characters based on the variable. So let's get access to that variable. The variable being the spawner information. We're just going to do a get actor property this time. The property is the variable. So this spawner info, let's go ahead and just copy the name and then come in here and in the detail panel, we can just replace the name of the property name, press enter, and you'll see that the error has gone away. That means everything is good. And if I was to press A on it, you'll see down here, there's the characters, the actors that we've specified, and there's the amount of them that we've specified. So awesome. We now have this. So now I want to go ahead and configure this per character. So I'll just drag out and search for attribute partition. Basically, if I now press A on this, you'll see that, hey, each one has been separated into its own thing. Now, to make sure that it's actually going to be using the index of them, I'm going to specify that in the detail panel. Instead of at last, specifically use the index. So basically, every single new entry of that array is now going to be its own loop. So if you have 100 unique characters, for whatever reason, you'll loop through it 100 times. If you have 3, you'll only loop through it 3 times. And in a scenario where you want to use the same character twice, it will still work to then loop through them individually twice in case you have other settings that you want to configure them with. Yeah, right now we're only doing the count and the actual actor respawning, but if you want to specify maybe spawn them bigger, smaller, whatever other variables you have, this will allow you to do that without having to worry. This is now set up, so now we need the loop. Let's go back to the content browser and we'll grab this PCG loop character spawner, drag it in, and I'll just select the loop node option on the bottom. And then we'll get our loop node. Let's go ahead and just double click on it to open it up. And now we can configure this. For the input, we have 3 different inputs here. So I've gone ahead and added the first one as locations, usage type normal. It is of a type point. These are the points that we just created with a spline. It's going to be required. The second one here is the character info loop that we wanted. So these are attributes. So we set it to attribute set and is also required. And this last one is a different one than I typically use, but it's very useful here. These are the used points, and it is a type feedback of a type point with its pin status as normal. Now, feedback here, this one specifically, this use points, is exactly the same as the one in this output. You can see here's the same use point, exactly named the same type, same everything for the feedback and point. You want to make sure that the allowed types, usage label, all of this matches the input for a feedback use. And I'll get into what this feedback does and how it works as we kind of get into it. But just know that the input and the output of a feedback type needs to be exactly the same in the name and type. I'm going to move this output to the side for now. Let's go ahead and just get these spawning just anywhere because I have the character information. So I want to just spawn them. They can overlap for now. It'll be fine. So what we can do is from locations, just drag out and search for random and you'll get random choice. If you go ahead and select it, this random choice actually has a fixed number option. You can give it a ratio by just unchecking fixed mode. So you can have 50% of the points, but I want to just give it a fixed number. We have a count variable, so that's what it's going to be piping into here. So I just open this up and there's the fixed number. Well, we want to use that. So from character info, just drag out and search for delete attributes. And I want to configure this to, instead of delete selected attributes, I want to keep only selected attributes and I want to keep only the count. With this configuration, if I pressed A on it, right, we won't see any information because we have not plugged it in. But if we go ahead now here and come here and plug this in, the transform points of the spline are the locations, and the spawn info here is the character info. Plug these in, and now in here, if I do A now, you will see, hey, there's our count of 10. Awesome. So that is our fixed number. We just plug that in, and we're good here. Now, one thing to note here is this seed. We'll get back to it, but make a mental note that we're not changing seed here. So with this, we're now choosing a specific number of them, and now I want to spawn the class. So from the ones that have been chosen, I'll just drag out and do an add attribute. We want the parameter version. What are we adding? Well, we want to add the class that the actual characters are going to be. So I'm going to use this delete attributes. I'll duplicate it and we'll plug the character info into here as well. But instead of changing the count to be the variable that we want, we could in this case just say delete selected attributes because we only have 2. So on this one, for example, if I pressed A, we now get the character. Again, this is exactly the same if you were to do keep and then just type in character. As you can see here, we get the same result, just a matter of convenience. Which one do you want to use here? So when we have the character, we'll go ahead and plug that into the attributes. And on this add attribute node, we can specify the name of the attribute we want to save it to. I'll just call it class. This is the class of the attribute. So awesome. We now have chosen some few points and it now knows the class that it needs to spawn. So from here, for demonstration, I can already use a spawn actor if I so wished. And all we need to do is change this spawn attribute to be on and specify the spawn attribute to be class. So with this configuration, you'll see, there we go. We now have characters here. But if we take a look at them, something's going to be weird is going on. Oh, well, they're spawning all of them on top of each other. We don't want that. We need them to pick a different location every single time because we don't want them spawning on the same spot. So this is where the feedback loop comes in. This is why we made this. We want to make a note of all of the points we have chosen and never choose them again. So the way we do this is by taking this random choice, chosen points, and moving them into this used points output. So we've now saved them. And what happens is anything that goes into here on the first loop will be in the input of the second loop. Then when it gets rechosen, it'll do the same again and again and again. So what we can do is now use these use points and use a difference node to cut them out. So from the locations, I'll go into this difference minimum, but instead of difference minimum, we want to do difference binary. And then I will just convert this back to points. So I'll search for 2 point, so spatial 2 point, and I'll plug this back in. The differences here are these use points. But to make sure that there's not going to accidentally grab a little bit extra, a point nearby, I'm just going to throw in a safety bounds modifier here, and I'll just change the scale of them to 0.5 in every single axis. So basically scale down the bounds and then use those as the difference. So now we have something like this. It is going to go ahead and use those points. It is going to select new ones, not including the used points. And then it's going to return just the remaining ones. And then again, remove those points that have been used and continue on every single loop. Now, you see, I'm outputting them and I'm inputting them. What does the first loop do? Well, the first loop takes in the input. In my case, I'm not putting in an input. It's not required. Because I'm not putting in an input, there are no points. And so it doesn't remove anything on the first round. It just uses all of them. Right? If you have nothing in the difference, you just go through and use all the points. So the second one, the ones that were picked, are no longer part of it. Then those new ones are no longer part of it, right? And it keeps going and going and going. But the main thing here is, by the way, is we're picking new points, right? These original points aren't actually part of these chosen ones anymore, right? We're just using them as a difference. So I'm overwriting the output here, not adding to it. I want to really add to it. So let's just use a merge points here. And let's go ahead and just merge these points with the chosen ones and then output those. So that way the new chosen ones just get added to the old chosen ones, just like so. So now no longer are we taking just the new ones, we're taking the old ones and the new ones every single time. And then so the number of points available gets lower and lower and lower. If we take a look now, well, we have the characters now a lot better spread out. If I go ahead and click on any of them and try to move them, you'll see there's only one. Each one of them is only one character here. Awesome. So that's working well. Now they're all facing the exact same way, and that's creepy. And they're also not on the ground. Let's go ahead and adjust both of those things. Well, them looking in the same way is easy fix. Right here before the spawn actor, I'll just use a transform points node, and I'll just go ahead and transform them between 0 and 360-degree rotation on the Z. I'm also going to move them up by 90 units. And why am I moving them up by 90 units? Because the actual center of the actor is the center, not the bottom. Right? If I select one of these guys, its center is actually the center. It is not the bottom. The pivot is not on the bottom. So when I go ahead and put it down on the ground, I don't want him in the ground. So I'll move them up by 90, which for my characters is the right size. So that's fine. You can always move them up a little bit higher and have them drop down, right? Not going to be an issue. But now we're going to have the random rotation. Now we need to actually move them down. And for that, we're just going to use a line trace. So if I drag out and search for line trace, you'll see there's a configuration under World Arraycast called line trace. We can go ahead and select it and then plug that in right before here. And now if you take a look, hey, look at that. It has now projected those points everywhere except on the ground. The very bottom ground here, nothing is on here. Why? Well, on this node, you have the configurations. And here under advanced, the collision channel is world static. And this ground, by default, in this default map, is not set to static. It is set to movable. If I change this to static and then go back into our little graph here and just move it or update it in any way, you will see, hey, there's our characters now projected all the way down into the ground. And the fun thing is, because I've tilted to randomize, I can now go and open up the spawner info, open up any one of these and modify these, right? And every single time it's going to randomize. Even though I've now have it at 10 here, if I go to 11 and go back to 10, the actual spread of these is going to be random every time. Again, you might not want this, in which case don't do the actual random seed, but you can see now we're spawning in this area and projecting on here. So cool. It's now just in the areas we want and on any elevations we want. So I can put this anywhere and we'll have randomly rotated characters, however many we want. And if for whatever reason I specify way too many of one, well, then we're basically just going to get that one, right? That's the only one we're going to get. But in my case, I have plenty of room. This is just fine. We can go ahead and tweak this to our heart's content. We can modify the actual spawn here and get the result we want. Awesome. There's one thing you might be noticing here, and it might not be very clear by just looking at it. But the main thing is, you can see as I move these around and they're spawning things, they're kind of spawning in a little bit too clustered. And that's really to do with this random choice. The random choice is using the same seed every time, and I really wanted to pick a different seed every time. So for that, I just right click and search for get index. So that we can get the loop index, right? So the first time it goes through, the index is 0. Then it's going to second time through, it'll be an index of 1. And we can just use that through the seed. That means that every single time it loops through, it will use a different seed. So now we get a little bit of a better variation here. If I go ahead and just randomize this now, you'll see that they're no longer really in lines as much. Obviously, randomness is randomness, but it ends up being a little bit more random, I find, doing it this way. Obviously, if you have way too many characters spawning, you'll still have kind of a grid, but at least now it's not going to be as much of like a deterministic setup. It's a little bit more random, depending on how many points you have. Also, if you're curious, if you want to know how many points you're working with just for kind of yourself, you can just drag out and do a gate element count so we know how many points there are. And from there, we can do a simple print string. Now, instead of the in here, we don't want to put that into the in. This element count is actually the print string itself. And the points here from this difference into the point conversion is the in. So when this happens, go ahead and print out how many we have. And then we just need to change the print string here to print to screen. By default, it is off. We'll go and turn it on for 15 seconds. Blue, that's fine. And now we can take a look. 75, 69, 64, 53. You can see the number of points is decreasing every single time. Now, fun fact about this, we're doing this through a merge points, right? Well, what happens if we don't use the merge points and just do all the way through into the use points and we just disconnect the other one entirely? Well, 64, 70, 69, 75. You see what happens? It is not properly removing all of the points. So it's removing just the last ones. And because we have done a random seed for this random choice, you're not necessarily going to even notice it. But if I had the same seed every single time, then occasionally you'll find yourself in a scenario where you have overlaps. So that's why we're using this seed with the loop index, so we have the variety, and why we're going ahead and merging the points, the new chosen with the previously chosen, and sending those through every single time. So that way, you can see this number is 75 to 69 to 64 to 53, right? It's decreasing because it prints the bottom one first. And every single time, you have less and less options. And that's the beauty of kind of feedback loops. You just get to send the information through each pass. But already, we have a character spawner, or I guess an actor spawner. Specify how many, and go ahead and specify what you want to spawn in whatever area you want. It'll go ahead and take care of it all for you. No need to worry about the navigation being built or anything of that sort. You can combine this with a PCG load on demand setting, so that way you only get to generate when you want to, and then maybe add a sphere collision or something else, or even reuse the box collision, so that way when the character overlaps that area, then the characters and everything will spawn by generating the graph. You have a lot of control at this point. Now, as always, the project files for this will be available on my Patreon, where you can join these wonderful people here in supporting what I do. It really means a lot. And if you'd like to join the community, link to the Discord and everything else is down in the description below, as always. And if you're looking for other cool use cases for PCG, what about 3D pathfinding thanks to just PCG and the PCGX free plugin? It really does open up quite a bit of possibilities. Go check it out.